Why are you crying? Stop whining. I bought today's newspaper. There is a large selection of vacancies here. We need a cleaner in a greenhouse with vegetables and a waitress in a restaurant. Go, the tips are good there. My son told me after he bankrupted me in a week. My name's Celine, yes, like the singer, but without the Vegas residency and with far more practical shoes. I'm 64, born with stubborn Irish cheekbones and a Cajun temper my grandmother blamed on the Louisiana humidity. I owned a florist company large enough to make Valentine's softer, funerals gentler, and weddings look like hope on a vine. People in our county used to joke that if you sneezed in February, it was probably one of my roses tickling your nose. I had 3 acres of glass and steel greenhouses, cross-ventilation like a cathedral's lungs, and boilers that purred as faithfully as old cats. Roses, hydrangeas, ranunculus, lisianthus I could coax color out of winter like a magician pulls silk scarves from his sleeve. Then came 2 funerals in 1 week. Only one had a coffin. I drove north to Indiana for my mother's service. She was 92, stubborn to the last, the sort of woman who used to iron socks and curse pre-shredded cheese. She was the one who taught me to deadhead hydrangeas and men in the same motion if they got unruly. I left my business in the hands of my only child, Grant, 34 years old, a jawline that photographs well, and the work ethic of a houseplant. He'd moved back in temporarily after his wife discovered that consultant met a man who consulted his video game settings and his poker app more than his arsum. I told myself a week would be fine. The systems were solid. My staff were the real spine. Then the weather turned on a dime like it always does the second you leave the driveway. A hard blue knife of Arctic air dropped across the Midwest. Every local radio host said the words once in a decade. In my line of work, that sentence means, check the thermostats, call the night man, call him again, move the tender stock, forgive God and buy diesel. Grant had a different theology. He believed in savings achieved by pretending cause and effect had never met. To avoid paying a week's salary, he sent the greenhouse crew on unpaid leave, a mini vacation, he told me later, as if he'd invented generosity by subtraction. The payroll cash I'd left on my desk with a note for the team if frost hits walked itself down to the casino app with his thumb guiding it like a priest leading a lamb to slaughter. He day drank and managed things, which is to say, he forgot the boilers had to be manually restarted when the mercury plunged, and that every 90 minutes in a hard snap you walk the aisles with a flashlight to catch the hiss that means life. By dawn, the hydrangeas were crystal statuary. My roses stood upright in their beds like soldiers at attention, the petals rimmed in sugar that would melt into rot by noon. The heaters, obedient but unattended, blinked their tiny red lights at an empty room. I landed at the airport to 23 missed calls that started cheery and ended with the sound a man makes when he realizes he has burned down his mother's church. I didn't answer any of them. I drove straight to the farm, wind shearing the tears off my cheeks before they could form. When I opened the greenhouse door, winter itself walked out. All at once. It was the kind of cold that makes you promise to be a better person if you're allowed to keep your fingers. I went to the middle aisle, the one where the apricot garden roses used to open like tiny sunsets, and I sat on the wet concrete and cried in a voice I didn't recognize. Not because of the money, though it was gone. Not because of the work, though it was a decade. But because I could see my mother there, bent over a stem, laughing that a bloom had no idea how much it cost to keep her alive. The hydrangeas crunched when I touched them. I gathered a fistful of frozen petals into my lap like confetti from a party for a person who forgot to show up. Grant stood in the doorway with the Sunday paper under his arm and the smell of whiskey hanging on him like a borrowed coat. He didn't come close. He held himself above the ruins like a tourist who'd strayed onto a battlefield. He opened his mouth and delivered that sermon about the cleaner in a greenhouse with vegetables and the waitress in a restaurant. He said, good tips, like they were a lifeboat and not a joke. I didn't say a word. He had already buried himself under the avalanche of his own sentences. I wiped my face. I stood up. I brushed frost from my jeans and walked past him without touching his sleeve. I went upstairs to the loft apartment, the one I kept above the office for late nights and early starts, and I pulled his life off my shelves with the calm I learned from my mother. When you clean a wound, you don't shout at the germ. You just disinfect. I packed one suitcase. It took 8 minutes. Men like my son never really accumulate much you can't fold. His console was a different story, cords like veins, controllers sticky with the sugar of a man's adolescence refusing to end. He was on the couch, elbows wide, playing and not playing, a boy hiding in pixels. I stood between him and his screen until the mountain in his game stopped moving and he had to look at the one in his living room. Then I reached behind the television and felt for the switch like a surgeon hunting for a foreign body. When the room went dead, he howled. "Mom?" I was in the middle, yes. I said, "You were." I put the console on top of the neat rectangle of his clothes, shut the lid with my palm like a gavel, and hauled the suitcase to the porch. "You're overreacting," he spit, his voice cracking on the word like a teenager's. "You're 34, I answered. "Your wife didn't kick you out because she hates you. She kicked you out because she loves herself. I am going to join her in that project." He flinched but wouldn't step outside, as if the weather might judge him. So I judged him, softly and all the way. "You've destroyed everything I loved so much, everything I lived for, everything that brought me a modest but stable income," I said. "You've destroyed my life's work. Many people have lost their jobs because of you. Who are you after this?" He didn't have an answer, and thank God, because if he'd tried to give me one, I might have forgiven him for the creativity alone. "Get out," I said. "You can cry at the curb. Men your age do it all the time and call it a podcast." I didn't slam the door. I just closed it. There's a difference. Slamming is for show. Closing is for decisions. The quiet after a decision is a holy thing. I boiled water for tea, because that is what women do when the apocalypse arrives. A kettle, a cup, a slice of lemon. The newspaper he'd thrown at me lay on the table. I opened it. The ink bled a little onto my fingertips, like a stigmata for the middle class, cleaner in a greenhouse. Waitress in a restaurant. I took the waitress job. I took it because dignity isn't about the height of your heels. Darling, it's about what you do when the floor tilts. I took it because I know menus the way most people know their first poems, and because I've been carrying trays of expectations my whole life. I took it because the manager looked me up and down, silver hair in a twist, black slacks, the posture of a violin, and said, "You sure you can handle a double?" I raised a son, I said. I am, unfortunately, well acquainted with doubles. The restaurant sat in that liminal space where business lunches rub elbows with anniversaries. Like me, it was older than it pretended to be and better for it. I learned the table numbers in an hour, the specials in 15 minutes, and the bartender's tells in a heartbeat. If she tucked her hair behind her ear, it meant the old-fashioned needed a second dash of bitters. If she looked at the top shelf and not the order ticket, it meant she liked you, but not enough to remember your name. On my first night, my hands remembered everything: how to balance weight with your core, how to lean without intruding, how to drop a joke like a napkin just when a man thinks he has the mess all over you. The tips came like love letters written by people who didn't know how to say the real thing. 20 here because I refilled his water without asking. 40 there because I looked a woman in the eye and told her the carbonara wouldn't forgive her dress. I told myself out loud, while counting singles at my kitchen table, there's no work to be ashamed of. There's only not working. The second week, I caught my reflection in the walk-in fridge, glass cheeks flushed, hairline damp, laugh lines busy, and thought, well now, Celine, you're still scaffolding. Slim and strong in the way women who carry themselves must be. I slept like I used to after Mother's Day weekends. Hard, grateful, briefly. On a Wednesday that began bright and turned thunderous, he arrived. Not with fanfare, not with a fleet of watches, just with a suit that fit like a promise and shoulders that forgot how to be arrogant. He sat at table 12, the corner near the giant ficus, and put his phone face down as if it had insulted him. He was the kind of handsome that makes a woman my age check for collateral damage, and aura that could make you stupid if you weren't already educated. He asked for black coffee at 6 in the evening. Men only order coffee like that when they're about to say goodbye or hello to something enormous. I brought him the house blend, hot as bad news, and asked if he preferred a quieter table. He smiled without his eyes. I prefer a kinder day, he said. I answered, because the only thing that heals a man is being reminded he isn't the first one to hurt. When he ordered steak and then didn't touch it, I brought him lemon sorbet on a plate that looked like the moon. House expense, I told him, although I'd paid for it myself from the roll of bills that used to be my retirement plan. He blinked at the spoon as if it might testify against him. I didn't order dessert, he said. I didn't order my son, I replied brightly. Life keeps bringing us both what we didn't ask for. That got a laugh straight from the abdomen, the sound a man makes when the truth slips in and oils a rusty hinge. He leaned back, studying me. Hypothetically, he said, if your wife said she was leaving you because you're married to your company, what would you do? Hypothetically, I said, I would stop dating my reflection in the office window. He winced. You did. I asked for that. I agreed. And since we're speaking in hypotheticals, here's one I learned in a greenhouse. If you water a plant on your schedule and not its thirst, you don't have a garden. You have a museum. Pretty for a minute. Dead by morning. He looked at me like men look at maps when the car finally runs out of gas. Give me something useful, he said, like a compass I can carry out of here. I set the spoon down. I keep a parable or two in my apron the way other women keep breath mints. This one was old and polished by use. Once, I began, a woman married a lighthouse. His eyebrows did the thing polite men do when they're about to humor you. A lighthouse, he echoed. Tall, dependable, always shining, always on. She loved him for his light because it saved people. But light can blind up close, you know? She'd stand at his base waving. He'd keep swiveling, doing his job, convinced that because she could still see him, she didn't need anything else. Storms came. Ships were saved. She grew tired of hugging a beam. One night, she carried a lantern down to the rocks and set it by the path to their house. Not big, not heroic, just warm. She left a note. This is what home looks like. If you can't see me, you're not looking down. He stared at the sorbet as if it had started preaching. And what did the lighthouse do? He asked, voice soft now, the kind that belongs to men in empty kitchens at midnight. That's between him and the ocean, I said, but I can tell you what the woman did. She stopped polishing glass that didn't face her. She lit her own porch. She said, if you want to come home, you'll find the way. If you don't, this lantern burns for me. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he looked younger and more dangerous the way men look when they finally consider being honest. He reached for his phone, hesitated, then slid it further away. What's your name? He asked. Celine, I said, like the singer. I do mean it's all coming back to me now if you feed me tiramisu. He smiled with his eyes this time. I'm Daniel. Good name, I said. Biblical. Men with that name usually survive lions. I married one, he murmured. I topped off his coffee, then left him alone with his storm. As I walked away, Sonia the bartender breathed in my ear. Table 12. He's some kind of big deal. Lives in the penthouse above the old bank. Drives a car that could buy this restaurant twice. Just had a spread in the business journal. I shrugged. Everyone looks the same when their heart is bleeding. Human, Saint Celine, she said, patron of men who waited too long to say sorry. Don't canonize me yet, I said. I've still got a temper and a mortgage. When I brought his check, he was gone. The bill was paid. The plate gleamed. Under the cup, folded once, was a note in a winter-steady hand. Thank you for the lantern. If it leads me anywhere, I'll let you know. He also left a tip that would have covered 3 sorbets and a pair of sensible clogs. But that wasn't what made my fingers tremble. It was the business card tucked beneath the cash. Black. No logo. Just a phone number and his first name embossed deeply enough to leave an impression in the wood when I pressed it too hard. The dangerous thing about impressions is how long they last after the thing itself leaves. I tucked the card into my apron, next to the pen I stole from my banker when I opened my first business account in 1998 back, when men looked at a young woman with a greenhouse plan and said, cute. I looked out at table 12 and felt something in my chest I hadn't felt since before frostbite. Became a love language. Movement. On my break, I stood under the alley's rattling fire escape and called Mother's old number, just to hear the recording that said it had been disconnected. Grief is not a straight road. It's a spiral staircase where every landing gives you a new view of the same loss. I thought about Grant somewhere with his suitcase and my console, about the greenhouse, still silent, full of green corpses, and about the lantern I had just placed at a stranger's feet. It had cost me a sorbet and a story. It felt like a down payment on a future I hadn't planned for. When my shift ended, the sidewalk was steaming from the late rain. I slid the black card into my wallet behind my driver's license like a secret that could either save me or set the whole house on fire. I walked home. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table with my tips spread like tarot cards and thought, okay, Celine, the storm has done its worst. What are you prepared to do now? I was still asking myself that when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Lantern carrier, it read, "Are you free tomorrow for coffee? Same table." I promised to look down. I stared at the message, then out the window at the night. Somewhere, my son was learning how to use a laundromat. Somewhere, a millionaire, though I didn't know that yet, was choosing between pride and warmth. Somewhere, a field of roses dreamed of spring as if dreaming hard enough could warm the ground. I typed back 6 words, "I am, bring your lighthouse," and hit send before I could pretend I wasn't ready. What I didn't know then is that one conversation would end up rewriting the rest of my life, paying debts I didn't know how to quantify, and returning to me, in a way both literal and wild, the green heartbeat of my business. But first would come the coffee, then the truth, then a check with my name on it and a dare I could not refuse. And, of course, a Sunday morning when my son would show up on my porch with a hangdog face and the same newspaper he once threw at me, at which point I would offer him a parable and a choice. But that's for later. For now, imagine me in a booth under a ficus, hands curled around a mug, waiting for a man with sea-tired eyes to walk back toward the light. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the way I always did when I still had a business to run. Old habits don't care about your new job title. They wake you at 5 a.m. and whisper, "The roses need misting." I lay there for a while, listening to the radiator click like an old metronome, thinking about that message on my phone, "Lantern carrier." I smiled at it, half flattered, half suspicious. It had been a long time since anyone gave me a name that didn't come with a bill or a sigh. When the sun pushed through the blinds, I decided what to wear. Not because I thought it was a date, oh no, 64 doesn't preen for a man. 64 dresses for dignity. I chose a navy dress that forgave my sins and black flats that forgave my knees. I twisted my silver hair up in a knot that said, "I have seen things and survived them." By 8, I was at the restaurant. Sonia was already there, leaning on the bar, sipping espresso as if it were penance. "Your mystery man coming back?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "Coffee," I said, feigning indifference. "He wants to talk." "Talk?" she snorted. "That's what they all say before the second divorce." I laughed, because I wasn't about to let her see that my pulse had picked up just from hearing it aloud. "Coming back." At 10, he arrived. Same corner table. No suit this time, just a sweater and jeans that somehow looked more expensive than the suit. His hair had that kind of careful disarray rich men pay barbers to achieve. He smiled when he saw me, and it wasn't the polite kind. It was the sort that happens involuntarily, like a reflex the body never unlearns. "Celine," he said, standing as I approached. "Thank you for coming. I work here," I said, deadpan. "You're lucky I'm on shift," he laughed, motioning for me to sit. "Then consider this an official business meeting. I'll pay for your time." "Oh, you couldn't afford my hourly rate," I said, and it was his turn to raise an eyebrow. We ordered coffee. I insisted on paying. He didn't fight me, which told me 2 things. He was raised right, and he'd already decided to see me again. Men with power don't give in unless they're planning a longer game. "So," I said, "how's the lighthouse?" He smiled into his cup, trying to learn to look down. "I told my assistant to hold my calls yesterday. You'd think I'd announced the apocalypse." You're married to your work, I said. Oldest affair in the book. He sighed. She really left, you know. My wife packed her bags last night. She said she was tired of talking to my voicemail. I took a long sip of coffee, then let her go. Don't chase her. People who run from silence aren't ready for truth yet. He looked at me the way men look at a horizon, like maybe it knows something he doesn't. How do you get so calm about loss? Practice, I said simply. That shut him up for a while. We sat in that quiet space that feels almost sacred, the one between two people who haven't decided yet if they're strangers or something else. He started asking questions, the gentle kind at first. Where I grew up, how I ended up working here, what I'd done before. I told him about the greenhouses, the flowers, the frost. I didn't hide the story. I told it the way you talk about a storm that's already passed. You can still smell the rain, but it can't drown you anymore. He didn't interrupt, not once, just listened, elbows on the table, eyes steady. When I told him about Grant, the unpaid leave, the heaters left cold, the flowers frozen like glass, his jaw tightened. And what did you do? He asked softly. I fired him, I said. From my life. You can't save a drowning man who refuses to kick. That must have been hard. No, I said. Loving him was hard. Letting him go was relief. He looked at me like I'd just said something he'd been trying to articulate for years. Celine, he said slowly, I think I need you to come work for me. I laughed so hard the waitress at the next table turned around. Excuse me? He leaned forward. I'm serious. I own several companies: construction, hospitality, logistics. Too many moving parts, and not enough people who actually think. You clearly do. You ran a business, survived disaster, and you understand people. I need someone like that. I studied him. You don't even know me. He smiled faintly. I know enough. And I know a good strategist when I see one. The word made something stir in me that hadn't moved in years. Strategist, not waitress, not mom, not woman who lost everything. I set my cup down. And what would this job be? Financial director. You'd manage budgets, help cut waste, analyze investments. I'd pay you properly. And if it doesn't work out, you walk away clean. I blinked at him. You're offering me an executive position over coffee and no arsum. He shrugged. I trust my instincts. Well, I said, leaning back, mine say you're either very generous or very reckless. He grinned. I like to think I'm both. What do you say? What could I say? I told him I'd think about it, which is polite code for yes, but let me sleep on the miracle. When I got home that night, I stood in front of the mirror and said aloud, Celine, you're about to work for a man who thinks dessert philosophy qualifies as a job interview. Then I laughed, because honestly, wasn't that exactly the kind of madness that had always kept me alive? The next morning, I walked into his office. It was in one of those glass towers downtown that reflect the sky so arrogantly you half expect clouds to charge rent. The receptionist offered me a coffee that tasted like ambition and guilt. Daniel came out to meet me. No tie, sleeves rolled up, smile steady. Welcome to the circus, he said. Let's see if we can make it dance. And so began the second act of my life. I took the job. The first week was like stepping into a storm of numbers and egos. His company was sprawling, contracts everywhere, money leaking like a faucet someone forgot to tighten. But chaos never scared me. I've seen what frost can do. I knew how to bring order from ruin. I started by doing what women have always done best: listening. I sat in on meetings, took notes, asked quiet questions that made loud men sweat. By Friday, I knew who was competent, who was pretending, and who was stealing. Daniel watched me work with that half smile of his, like he was waiting for me to either quit or start a revolution. I chose the latter. By the end of month 1, I'd cut unnecessary expenses by 15%, negotiated better supplier rates, and reorganized his project teams. The board members, mostly men with watches worth more than their wives' cars, looked at me like I'd crawled out of the Bible to scold them. One of them tried to call me sweetheart. I replied, only if you're prepared to be called Junior. Daniel nearly spit out his coffee laughing. He started stopping by my office more often after that. At first to talk numbers, then ideas, then somehow life. We discovered we'd both grown up in Indiana. Both had mothers who believed hard work was a religion. Both knew the taste of failure. There's a strange intimacy in talking to someone who's been through the same kind of ruin. You start to see the same scars on each other, the ones polite society pretends not to notice. One night, after a long day of budget meetings, he offered to drive me home. It was raining, the kind of steady drizzle that makes the city lights blur like watercolor. We sat in his car for a moment, not talking, the air between us full of possibility and restraint. "You know," he said quietly, "I haven't felt this alive in years." I turned to him. "Because of the company's profit margins." He laughed. "Because of you." I should have said something wise, something that would keep things safely professional. Instead, I said, "Careful, Daniel. Lighthouses don't fall in love with lanterns. They get jealous of how easily we move." He didn't answer. He just looked at me with a softness that made my pulse forget its rhythm. We didn't kiss, not that night, but something between us shifted. 2 months later, he called me into his office with a mischievous glint in his eye. "I have something for you," he said, handing me a thick envelope. Inside were documents, purchase receipts, soil contracts, equipment orders. "What's this?" I asked, brow furrowed. "New greenhouse seedlings," he said. "The best suppliers. Delivered next week. I thought you might want to rebuild." I just stared at him. My throat tightened until words turned to smoke. "You didn't have to, I know," he interrupted gently. "But I wanted to, because someone once told me that if you stop polishing glass that doesn't face you, you can light your own porch again." That was it. I cried, right there in his office. Not the weak kind of crying, the kind that cleans you out from the inside. He didn't touch me. He just stood there, hands in pockets, giving me space to remember what joy felt like. When I finally spoke, I said, "You're dangerous, Daniel." He smiled, only to frost. And that's how I got my second chance. I reopened the greenhouses with a new name, Lantern Blooms. The first seedlings arrived under a bright March sun. As I pressed the soil around their roots, I whispered, "Welcome home." The warmth in that glass house wasn't just from the heaters. It was from something I hadn't felt since my mother's hands last brushed mine. Hope. Daniel visited often, sometimes bringing lunch, sometimes just walking through the aisles, looking at the flowers as if they could tell him secrets. And that's where things might have stayed, calm and blooming, if not for the knock on my door one Sunday morning. When I opened it, there stood Grant, hair unkempt, eyes red, holding a crumpled newspaper. "Mom," he said, voice small, "can we talk?" Ah, I thought, frost again. When I saw Grant standing there on my porch that Sunday morning, holding the same kind of newspaper he'd once flung at me, I swear the world tilted back into a familiar orbit, one I thought I'd escaped. The first thought that came to me wasn't anger or pity. It was, well, the frost found its way back. He looked older, though not in the noble way time ages a man. His cheeks were sunken, his jacket rumpled, the whites of his eyes veined with whatever cocktail of regret and whiskey he'd been living on. "Mom," he said again, and that one syllable carried 1,000 things he didn't yet have the courage to say. I didn't invite him in immediately. I let him stand there long enough for the morning air to remind him that warmth is something earned. Then I stepped aside and said, "You can come in, but wipe your shoes. I don't need another mess to clean." He smiled faintly, that same boyish half grin that used to get him out of trouble when he was 10 and caught stealing cookies before dinner. But I wasn't that mother anymore. The one who covered his mistakes with hugs and hot chocolate had frozen right alongside those roses. He shuffled in, newspaper still in hand. "Nice place," he mumbled, glancing around my new home, the tidy cottage by the reopened greenhouse. "Thank you," I said. "I paid for it by serving coffee to men who could buy and sell this town. You'd be surprised how much strength you can find once you stop expecting anyone else to rescue you." He sat at the kitchen table, eyes darting to the framed photos on the wall, me and Daniel at the ribbon cutting for Lantern Blooms, the new staff I'd hired, the garden glowing with life again. "So," I said, pouring coffee for both of us, What brings you here? Don't tell me the casinos ran out of free drinks, he winced. Mom, please. I came to say I'm sorry. The words landed between us like a fragile vase. I wanted to believe them, but I'd seen enough broken glass to know apologies are only as good as what you do after. Sorry, I repeated softly. For which part? The bankruptcy? The frost? The insult about job ads? Or are you just practicing the word before you go see someone who'll actually believe it? He stared at his coffee. For all of it, he whispered. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I could handle it. I thought that money was for your staff's wages. I cut in. You gambled their livelihoods because you were bored and wanted to feel powerful. His eyes filled, and for a fleeting second, I saw the little boy again, the one who used to bring me dandelions and call them sun gifts. I've hit bottom, Mom, he said hoarsely. I owe money. I lost my apartment. I just need help getting back on my feet. Ah, there it was, the real reason for his visit. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow sip of coffee. You know, I said, when I lost everything, you told me to stop whining and look for a job. Cleaner in a greenhouse, waitress in a restaurant. Remember that? He nodded miserably. Well, I did exactly that, I continued. And it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. You see, sometimes we mistake punishment for purification. He frowned. What does that mean? It means, I said, that fire doesn't only destroy, it refines. The frost that killed my flowers made me start over. It burned away every illusion I had about what was holding me up. And look at me now, Grant. I rebuilt. Without shortcuts, without handouts. So tell me what's stopping you from doing the same? He didn't answer. I reached for a folded check I'd written days earlier. I'd been thinking about him, hoping maybe he'd show up not just to beg, but to change. The check was enough to clear his debts and buy him time. I slid it across the table. This, I said, is a lifeline. Use it wisely. His eyes lit up, but before his fingers touched it, I reached for something else, a newspaper, fresh from the morning porch. I spread it beside the check. And this, I said, tapping the classifieds, is a second chance. Car wash, warehouse, tire shop, take your pick. Honest work. Doesn't pay much at first, but the dignity's free. He blinked at me. Mom, are you serious? Deadly, I said. Why are you crying? Stop whining. I bought today's newspaper. There's a wide selection of vacancies here. You can go to the car wash or to get a tire change. His face twisted, first in disbelief, then in anger. He grabbed the paper and ripped it clean in half. You think this is funny? He shouted. You're rich now, working for that guy, living comfortably, and you're lecturing me about jobs? The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. I met his eyes, steady as glass. Then I picked up the check, tore it neatly down the middle, and dropped both halves into the trash. Lesson 1, I said quietly. When you tear up opportunity, you tear up mercy too. He just stared at me, mouth open, but no sound came out. I love you, Grant, I said. But love isn't the same as enabling. You need to earn your way back, not to my wallet, but to your own dignity. When you do, my door will still be here. He stood, shoulders slumped, eyes glistening. You really won't help me? I just did, I said. He left without another word. I watched him go through the window, head down, newspaper pieces fluttering from his hands like dead leaves. When the door clicked shut, I felt no triumph, no regret, only peace. Because sometimes love has to sound like steel before it can sound like grace. That afternoon, Daniel stopped by. He'd gotten into the habit of appearing unannounced, always with something thoughtful in hand, fresh bread, tulips from my own greenhouse, once even a basket of lemons, because he said I seemed like a woman who could weaponize citrus. He found me sitting by the window, staring out at the fields. Tough morning? He asked gently. I nodded. My son came home. His expression softened. Ah, the prodigal frost. Something like that. He placed a warm hand on my shoulder. You did what you had to. I know, I said, but knowing doesn't make it pleasant. Parenting never is, he said, sitting beside me. It's just one long series of letting go. We sat there a while, the air between us comfortable. He looked at me with that quiet admiration that men of his kind rarely let themselves show. "Do you ever think about starting over?" he asked. I chuckled. "Daniel, I just rebuilt an entire business from compost. How much more starting over do you want?" He smiled. "No, I mean personally. You and me." My heart thudded once, hard enough to feel it in my throat. "I don't know," I said softly. I stopped planning for romance around the same time I started buying heating fuel in bulk. "Celine," he said, "you're the most alive person I've met in decades. You've built something out of ashes. That's rare. Don't make a myth out of me," I said. "I'm just stubborn and allergic to pity." "Good," he murmured. "That's my favorite combination." He didn't kiss me, not yet, but the way he looked at me told me it was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't be impulsive. It would be the kind of kiss that arrives after two people have finally decided they've earned the right to hope again. Over the next few months, lantern blooms flourished. Orders poured in, staff doubled, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was steering my own life again. Daniel's company thrived too. Together, we were unstoppable. At the end of one particularly busy week, he invited me to a gala. "Just business," he said. "Wear something that makes people regret underestimating you." I did. A deep emerald dress, hair swept up, pearl earrings that once belonged to my mother. When I walked into that ballroom, people turned. It wasn't vanity, it was vindication. Daniel met me halfway across the room, looking at me like a man seeing daylight after a long tunnel. "You clean up nicely," he murmured. "Don't I always?" I shot back. The evening went beautifully until, near the end, I spotted someone at the edge of the crowd. Grant. My heart stuttered. He was talking to one of the caterers, sleeves rolled up, face flushed but not from drink, from work. He saw me and froze. Then, to my surprise, he smiled and gave a small nod. A silent "I'm trying." I smiled back, just as small, just as proud. Maybe the frost hadn't killed everything after all. Maybe some roots just needed longer to find their way back to warmth. You can always tell when a man is about to propose, at least a woman my age can. There's a specific nervous electricity that hums under his skin, a mix of fear and awe, like he's about to wrestle an angel. By the time Daniel started fidgeting in meetings, straightening his cufflinks for no reason, and calling me Celine in that slow, deliberate tone as though he were trying the word on for size, I knew something was coming. Still, I pretended not to notice. It's more fun to make a man sweat a little. It had been 6 months since he gave me the seedlings. 6 months since lantern blooms rose from the ashes. The new greenhouses thrived lush, alive, full of color so vibrant it felt like forgiveness in bloom. Daniel's business had grown too. Our strategies were working, profits climbing, staff morale rising like bread in a warm kitchen. He liked to say, "You don't just fix numbers, Celine, you fix people." I'd laugh and tell him, people are easier. They don't need constant pruning, just sunlight and accountability. One Friday evening, as I was finishing payroll, he called and said, "Don't make plans tomorrow. I'm kidnapping you for dinner." I arched an eyebrow, though he couldn't see it. "Kidnapping is illegal, Daniel. So is stealing hearts," he said. But here we are. Lord help me, the man had learned charm. Saturday arrived bright and golden, one of those early summer evenings that smell like cut grass and possibility. He showed up right on time, driving a vintage convertible the color of midnight, the kind of car that makes you want to rewrite your youth. "Where are we going?" I asked as I climbed in. "You'll see," he said, grinning. We drove out of town, the wind tangling my hair, the fields stretching endless on either side. After about 40 minutes, he turned down a familiar dirt road. My stomach flipped when I saw it, the old lake, the one where my father used to take us fishing when I was a girl. The same place where, years later, Daniel told me he'd spent his childhood summers. At the water's edge, a small wooden dock glowed with fairy lights. A table for two stood at the end, set with candles and flowers, my flowers, hydrangeas and pale pink roses from my own greenhouse. "Well," I said, "you've outdone yourself. What's the occasion?" He helped me out of the car, his hand steady on my back. "Do I need one?" "No," I admitted, smiling. but I like that you think you do. We sat. The sun dipped low, painting the lake in gold. He poured wine, his fingers brushing mine, and for a long while we didn't speak. The silence between us was the comfortable kind, the kind that says I'm home. After dinner, he cleared his throat and looked out over the water. You know, he said, when I first met you, I thought you were just remarkable. Just remarkable? I teased. Terrifyingly remarkable, he corrected, grinning. But I didn't realize how much you'd change my life. You saved my company, Celine. You made me see what mattered again. I told you to look down, not at spreadsheets, I said softly. He nodded. Exactly. Then he stood, walked around the table, and knelt right there on the old dock, the candlelight flickering against his face. My breath caught. Celine, he said, his voice rough around the edges. I don't have any rehearsed speech. I just know that every good thing in my life since last winter traces back to you. You turned ruin into bloom. You made me believe that second chances aren't charity, they're courage. He opened a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a single emerald the color of my greenhouse at dawn. Will you marry me? For once, I was speechless. Me, the woman who could outtalk priests and politicians. I just stared at that man on his knee, remembering the wreck I'd been 6 months ago, broke, humiliated, sitting among dead roses, thinking my life had ended. And now this. I let the silence stretch until he began to look worried. Then I reached out, tilted his chin up with one finger, and said, You always did have a weakness for strong women, Daniel. Is that a yes? He asked. It's a maybe if you can dance, I said, laughing. He blinked, then laughed too rich, unguarded, joyful. He stood, took my hand, and, without music, we danced right there on the dock. The air smelled like roses and rain. The lake whispered against the shore, and above us, the first stars winked their approval. Finally, I said yes. Word spread faster than pollen in spring. The staff at both our companies nearly combusted with excitement. Sonia from the restaurant declared herself maid of honor before I could stop her. You're my hero, she said. Proof it's never too late to trade heartbreak for a high-value man. I told her I wasn't trading anything, I was just finally receiving what I'd earned. Grant came by the next week. He looked better, cleaner, calmer, eyes brighter. I got a job, he said, at a tire shop. The pay's awful, but it's honest. I smiled. Good. Grease washes off easier than guilt. He grinned shyly. I heard you're engaged. Word travels fast. He shifted his feet. He seems like a good guy. He is, I said, and I didn't need to raise him. He laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years. Then he looked serious. I want to make things right, Mom. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'd like to help with the business again someday. When you're ready. I studied him carefully. There was no slickness now, no excuses, just humility. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. Maybe, I said, when you've proven you can keep something alive. He nodded, understanding perfectly. Before he left, I handed him a single rose from the new greenhouse. This one survived the frost, I told him. So can you. That night, Daniel and I sat on my porch watching fireflies blink in the dark. You handled your son beautifully, he said. Practice, I replied, and maybe a bit of inherited ruthlessness. He chuckled. I think that's what I love about you. You never let life decide the ending. I turned to him, studying his face in the soft glow of the porch light. And what do you love second best? He smiled, kissed my hand, and said, The way you still make me nervous. Well, I said, keep that. It'll keep you honest. He laughed. Celine, you are the only woman I've ever met who can make a proposal feel like a business negotiation. Good, I said. That means you know what you're signing up for. We planned a small wedding, nothing extravagant, just family, a few friends, and of course, rows of my flowers as witnesses. But life, as always, likes to test you before blessing you. A week before the ceremony, a storm hit. Not frost this time, rain. Torrential, relentless, biblical. The kind of rain that turns fields into swamps and greenhouses into aquariums. I woke at dawn to find water seeping under the doors of lantern blooms. I grabbed my boots, pulled on a raincoat, and ran out into the downpour. The staff arrived minutes later, soaked but determined. We worked together sandbagging, pumping, lifting trays of seedlings onto higher racks. And in the middle of it all, I found myself laughing. Yes, laughing, because I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. The first storm had destroyed me because I was alone. This one couldn't touch me because I wasn't. When Daniel arrived hair-plastered, shirt clinging to him like a second skin, he looked at me and said, "You know, Celine, you're magnificent when you fight weather. Comes with experience," I shouted over the rain. "And better staff." He grinned and helped me haul a tray of orchids to safety. By evening, the rain eased. The greenhouses stood, battered but unbroken. We'd saved nearly everything. I stood among the dripping flowers, hands on my hips soaked to the bone, and thought, let it come. I'm not the woman who freezes anymore. Daniel came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and whispered, "You know, this is the second time I've watched you rebuild something from a storm. Maybe that's your superpower." "Maybe," I said, leaning back against him. "Or maybe I just finally learned that weather always passes if you refuse to." The wedding took place a week later, under a clear blue sky that looked scrubbed clean by all that rain. The guests sat among my flowers, sunlight glinting off dewdrops like tiny jewels. Grant walked me down the aisle nervous, proud, whispering, "Don't cry, Mom, you'll ruin your mascara." I didn't cry. Not then. I'd shed all my tears months ago in that frozen greenhouse. When Daniel took my hands, he said, "You brought life back to everything you touched, Celine, including me." I smiled and answered, "And you taught me that sometimes, the best gardens are the ones we plant after the frost." We said our vows, and when he kissed me, the crowd cheered, the air filled with the scent of roses, and for the first time in years, I felt completely radiantly safe. Later, as the sun set, Grant came to me holding a small envelope. "I got my first full paycheck," he said, handing it over. I opened it and inside was a folded slip of paper. "A check, made out to me, for the money I cost you," he said quietly. "It's not much, but it's a start." I smiled through tears. "You've already paid me back, sweetheart. You found your way home." That night, as Daniel and I danced beneath strings of fairy lights, I looked around at the laughter, the flowers, the faces I loved. The woman I'd been 6 months ago would have said, "Life destroyed me." But the woman I was now understood. Life doesn't destroy, it prunes. It cuts back what no longer serves, so the heart can bloom again. And oh, how it had bloomed. You'd think that after a wedding like that, a day stitched together with sunlight, laughter, and the faint perfume of my own rose's life would finally sit still. But I've learned that stillness isn't living. It's just an intermission between storms. And I, Celine Dupree, have grown too fond of the wind to wish it away. A month after the wedding, I stood in the greenhouse early one morning, barefoot, coffee steaming in one hand, pruning shears in the other. The place was quiet except for the slow drip of condensation on the glass. My flowers, those beautiful, stubborn survivors, were awake before the world, leaning toward the light with a kind of defiant grace. As I trimmed a line of pale hydrangeas, I thought about the journey that brought me here, from the frostbitten wreck of my old life to this blooming second chance. There was something almost biblical about it: ashes to abundance, sorrow to strategy, grief to growth. Daniel walked in, tireless, sleeves rolled, that smile of his softer than sunrise. "You look at those flowers like they're children," he said. "They are," I replied. "Except these ones don't talk back or gamble the payroll." He laughed, coming closer. "How's your son doing?" I smiled. "He's working. He comes by every Sunday now. Still hasn't asked for money once." "That's growth." Daniel leaned against the doorframe. "You think he'll ever forgive himself?" "Maybe," I said, "but that's not my job to manage anymore. Forgiveness is a do-it-yourself project." He nodded. "And you? Have you forgiven him?" I looked out over the sea of color: the white lilies, the pink ranunculus, the golden marigolds. "Yes," I said, "because holding onto anger is like keeping frost in your pocket. Eventually, it burns you too." He smiled, and for a moment the world felt perfectly balanced. That Sunday, Grant arrived early. He'd been doing that lately, showing up with his sleeves rolled and hands clean, bringing small gifts like fresh bread or a new garden tool. I suspected it was his way of making amends in installments. "Morning, Mom," he said. "Something smells amazing." "Coffee," I said. "The true nectar of rebirth." He sat at the table, fidgeting with a mug. "I got promoted," he blurted out. "Shop manager. My boss said I'm the most reliable guy he's got." I beamed. "See? All that discipline I tried to drill into you finally sprouted." He grinned, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, well, I learned from the best. And I wanted to thank you for not bailing me out when I came crawling." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I remember. The newspaper scene? Very dramatic." He chuckled. "You were right though. Losing everything made me find myself." "Good," I said. "You've learned the family motto." He tilted his head. "We have one. Fall spectacularly, rise strategically," I said. He laughed, and I realized it was the first time in years that our laughter didn't have sorrow hiding underneath. After breakfast, we walked to the greenhouse. He stopped in front of the roses, the same kind that had frozen that awful winter. "They're beautiful," he said softly. "They forgave the frost." I told him, "You could learn something from them." He turned to me. "You always talk in riddles, Mom. What's the lesson this time?" So I gave him one last parable, the kind that stays. "There was a young man," I began, "who inherited a field from his mother. Rich soil, good seeds, everything he needed to grow something lasting. But instead of tending it, he gambled the harvest before it ever sprouted. When the storms came, he cursed the sky for being cruel. Years later, he returned to the field. Weeds everywhere, ground hardened. He thought it was hopeless. But then he saw one green sprout pushing through a crack in the dirt, a survivor. So he knelt, cleared the weeds, watered it, cared for it. And from that one stubborn seed, a garden grew again." The moral, darling, is simple. Sometimes the last living thing in the ruins is the best part of you. If you nurture it, you'll bloom again. He was quiet a long time. Then he said, "You're the sprout, aren't you?" I smiled. "Maybe, but now you are too." He nodded, eyes bright. "Thanks, Mom, for the story, for everything." That evening, after he left, Daniel and I sat on the porch with a bottle of wine between us and the twilight humming around us like a lullaby. "You're glowing," he said. "I'm aging gracefully," I replied. "No," he said, touching my hand. "You're alive. There's a difference." I looked out at the garden, at the greenhouses gleaming under the moonlight. "You know," I said, "when everything died that winter, I thought it was the end. But maybe it was just pruning season. The universe trimmed away everything that wasn't growing so that I could." He squeezed my hand. "And look what you became. A woman who doesn't freeze," I said, "who doesn't beg for warmth, she builds it." Daniel smiled. "You always did know how to turn pain into poetry." "I had good material," I said. "Life keeps handing me plot twists." Weeks passed. The business flourished, my marriage settled into a warm rhythm of humor and partnership, and Grant slowly rebuilt his own life. Every now and then, I'd catch myself marveling at how far we'd all come. One afternoon, I walked through the greenhouse, clipping fresh flowers for an upcoming charity gala. I stopped at a cluster of roses that had bloomed late, a rare, resilient strain that had survived both frost and flood. I whispered, "You and me both, darling." That's when I heard Daniel behind me, his voice low and amused. "Talking to your flowers again?" "Of course," I said. "They listen better than men." He chuckled. "You're not wrong." He slipped his arms around my waist, kissed the side of my neck, and murmured, "You know, when I first met you, you brought me dessert to cheer me up. Now you've given me an entire life." I turned in his arms and said, "And you gave me back mine." We stood there in the quiet hum of the greenhouse, surrounded by the scent of roses and soil and renewal. For the first time in a long, unpredictable life, I felt the rarest luxury of all, contentment. The following Sunday, Grant showed up again. He'd brought a gift this time, a neatly framed clipping from a local newspaper. The headline read, "Lantern Blooms Donates Record Proceeds to Community Garden Initiative." "Thought you'd want a copy," he said. I took it, smiling. A newspaper finally bringing good news. That's a first. He grinned. Guess I've come full circle. Yes, I said, eyes twinkling. And this time, no job ads. He hesitated at the door. Mom, you ever think maybe it all happened the way it was supposed to? I looked at him for a long moment. Every storm knows where to find the ground that needs rain. He nodded, kissed my cheek, and left. That night, I sat with Daniel by the fireplace, the glow flickering across the room. I thought about the frost, the loss, the comeback, the love that bloomed out of the ruins. And I realized something. Every ending I'd ever mourned had been nothing more than a disguised beginning. So I lifted my glass and said, "To Frost." Daniel looked at me, puzzled. "To Frost?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "Because without it, we'd never know how strong our roots are." He raised his glass too. "To roots then, and to the woman who refuses to wilt." We clinked glasses, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. People sometimes ask me now, "Celine, aren't you angry at your son? Don't you wish things had gone differently?" And I tell them the truth. No, because that boy's mistake, as devastating as it was, cracked open the ground beneath my feet and forced me to grow new roots deeper, stronger, fearless. Had he not destroyed my old life, I'd never have found this one. Sometimes ruin isn't betrayal, it's instruction. And when I see my son these days, steady job, steady eyes, shoulders no longer slumped, I thank the frost silently, because if we'd both stayed safe, neither of us would have learned how to survive. So that's my story. A florist who lost her flowers, a mother who lost her patience, a woman who lost everything and then built something better. And if there's a lesson in it, it's this: when life hands you winter, plant anyway. When the people you love break your heart, let it break open. And when someone tells you to stop whining and go get a job, do it, but make sure the next time you see them, you own the place. As for me, I still start every day the same way, barefoot in the greenhouse, coffee in hand, whispering to the blooms. Because no matter how old you are, no matter how many frosts you've faced, the rule remains the same. If you have the courage to start over, the garden will always come back. And this time, it will grow exactly the way you want it to.